They say you can't choose your family, but I sure as hell wouldn't have picked mine. It was around 9:15 p.m. The Anderson Technology Gala was in full swing. Champagne flutes clinking, violins humming, artificial laughter echoing across the grand ballroom of the Belmont Towers Hotel. I stood alone, just past the marble arch near the West Terrace, nursing a glass of sparkling water, while the crowd buzzed with over-rehearsed praise for my sister. My sister, Sienna Carter, the golden child, the VP of Acquisitions at Anderson Tech, and tonight's crown jewel. She stood beneath a shimmering crystal chandelier, her champagne flute raised high as she toasted to the future of a multi-billion-dollar merger with Sterling Industries. "Tomorrow, Anderson Tech will change the game forever," she declared, her voice ringing clear through the speaker system. "The largest merger in our company's history, $4.2 billion signed and sealed by noon." The crowd burst into applause. I didn't. I knew something no one else in that room did. The only thing getting signed tomorrow wasn't a merger. It was the beginning of their downfall. "Ava, stop lurking in the shadows." My mother's voice cut through the air like broken glass. "You look like the help." I turned slowly. Of course, she wore her pearls tonight. The celebration set, she called it. A gift from my father after his first Forbes cover. Tonight was special, after all. Sienna's night. "Come, dear," she added, her red lips stretching into something that was almost a smile. "Sienna was just telling us about the Sterling deal. It's going to make history." "She's always been a star," my father chimed in, adjusting his cufflinks. 32 and already closing billion-dollar deals. Imagine that. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I could practically hear the unspoken "unlike you" at the end of it. Richard Carter was the kind of man who shook hands like he was claiming territory. Even now, approaching 60, he still walked like the entire tech industry bowed beneath his feet. His legacy, as he often reminded us, was Anderson Tech, and we were merely its caretakers. All of us except me. Sienna turned toward me with a smirk. "And what are you up to these days, Ava? Still, running that little company of yours?" I kept my face neutral. "Nexus Technologies." "Right," she laughed. "You do cybersecurity or coding? Something in a basement, if I remember." That basement was the top 5 floors of the Sapphire Building on Grant and Montgomery. But I didn't correct her. I never did. Let them talk. Let them underestimate me. I'd spent years listening to these backhanded comments, years of being the other daughter, the one who left the family company, the one who threw away her future. "You could have been in management by now," my mother said, shaking her head. "Such wasted potential." I bit the inside of my cheek. What they didn't know was that every snide comment, every scoff, every dismissive glance, it all fueled me. I'd been playing the long game, and tomorrow it would pay off. "I should get going," I said, checking the time on my watch. A minimalist piece that cost more than Sienna's entire outfit. "Big meeting early." Sienna raised an eyebrow, cocking her head like I was a stray dog that had wandered in from the street. "Finally landed a real client?" "Something like that," I said, already turning away. As I stepped toward the exit, I caught a whisper. My mother again, never subtle. "It's embarrassing, really. She just works at some startup." The words didn't sting, not anymore. They settled over me like dust on glass, easy to brush off. Outside, the air was cold and clear. My driver, Thomas, opened the door of the town car. Not the Bentley I actually owned, but a more modest ride I kept for family events like this. "Home, Miss Collins?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, sliding into the back seat. "Take me to the office." The moment the door shut behind me, I exhaled. The tension lifted from my shoulders, like a cloak I could finally take off. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, my COO, all set for tomorrow. They have no idea. I looked out the window at the glowing skyline as we drove past Market Street. Each building, each floor, each window lit with promise or delusion. Tomorrow morning, Anderson Tech would walk into a trap they never saw coming. And I, Ava Carter, the disappointment, the basement coder, the forgotten daughter, I would walk out with everything they thought was theirs. They never saw me coming, and now it was too late. 3 years ago, I walked out of Anderson Tech with nothing but a backpack and a thumb drive. I didn't slam doors. I didn't make threats. I didn't cry. I just walked. Past my father's office, past the framed articles glorifying the Carter legacy, past Sienna's smug smile as she pretended not to see me leave. They thought they were watching me give up. They had no idea I was just getting started. That thumb drive held something no one else in that building had bothered to look at. Data logs, breach reports, flagged anomalies, evidence of vulnerabilities so deep they could have crippled the company from the inside. I'd spent months trying to get someone to take them seriously. Meetings, memos, late nights, and every time the same answer. Don't overthink it, Ava. We have a cybersecurity team. Stick to your department. What they really meant was stay in your lane. So I found a new lane. I cashed out my modest stock options. Nothing compared to Sienna's golden parachute, but enough. I rented a single-room space above a Vietnamese bakery in North Beach and started from scratch. No employees, no PR firm, no funding rounds, just me, a refurbished server, and a vision that kept me up until 3 a.m. most nights. I called it Nexus Technologies. It sounded clinical, anonymous, intentionally forgettable. For the first 6 months, I lived like a ghost. I wrote every line of code myself. I cold emailed hundreds of potential clients. I slept on a futon in the office. But I knew I was building something real, something that didn't just patch holes, but anticipated attacks before they happened. I wasn't interested in playing defense. I was building a weapon, and once I knew it worked, I started hiding. I created a shell company to serve as the parent brand, then another, and another. I used proxies, burned through 3 separate legal teams, and registered trademarks under a synthetic identity, Catherine Collins. A name that sounded like it belonged in boardrooms, not in back-alley code caves. By the time year 2 rolled around, I had a team of 30, hand-picked engineers and analysts who thought Catherine Collins was a tech visionary too private to meet. NDA-bound and well-compensated, none of them ever asked questions. They didn't know their boss used to be the laughingstock of one of Silicon Valley's most arrogant dynasties. They didn't care. Our breakthrough came when we intercepted a failed breach attempt on a major banking client. My system flagged it, traced it, neutralized it in under 90 seconds. Within a month, Nexus was under contract with 3 Fortune 500 companies. Within 6, we had offices in Chicago, Austin, London. And I still hadn't told a soul who I was. There were nights I'd sit alone in the corner office of our San Francisco HQ, staring out at the skyline, replaying their words in my head. You're just not cut out for leadership. Cybersecurity is a dead end. You'll regret leaving. It wasn't just professional, it was personal. My family hadn't just doubted my skills, they'd made it clear they never believed in me. The worst part? I'd almost believed them. But then Sterling Industries happened. It started with a tip from one of our analysts, irregular behavior inside Sterling's internal systems. At first, I assumed it was just another overhyped breach, but the deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Expired encryption, employee credentials stored in plaintext, backdoors built into their payment gateway, and Anderson Tech was courting them. Hard. By the time I saw Sienna's name listed as the lead on the Sterling deal, I knew what had to happen. We didn't go public, we went direct. I sent Sterling's board a confidential briefing. Everything we'd uncovered, accompanied by a respectful offer: allow Nexus to conduct a full takeover and integrate our systems, or risk public exposure. I didn't threaten. I didn't bluff. They chose survival. The final papers were signed just before dawn. No press, no headlines, just my initials on a document that would turn the Anderson legacy inside out. Still, I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. There was a part of me that wanted to scream it, to show up at their offices and throw it in their faces. But revenge, real revenge, isn't about the moment. It's about the momentum. It's about letting them climb higher and higher, all while knowing the ground beneath them is disappearing. They thought I was working out of a garage. They thought I was another failed millennial chasing startup dreams. They thought I had vanished. And tomorrow, when they sit in front of every major news network, preparing to sign the most celebrated merger in their company's history, they'll realize I've been here all along. Not lurking, not waiting, building. And this time, they'll have no choice but to say my name. The morning sun hit the windows like spotlights, casting long beams across the Anderson Tech headquarters. From my vantage point across the street, sipping lukewarm coffee in my private suite at the Ritz, I could see the media vans lining up like vultures circling a fresh kill. And they didn't even know what they were about to witness. I had been watching the live pre-coverage on my laptop. CNBC was already on site, anchors practically buzzing as they teased the merger of the year. Inside, reporters jostled near the elevators, angling for a shot of the woman they were all here to worship, Sienna Carter. She emerged, right on cue, in a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than my first month of payroll at Nexus. Her blonde hair was coiled into an immaculate bun, her expression dripping with polished confidence. She smiled, waved, posed, every gesture rehearsed. The camera loved her. The press ate it up. They always did. "We're not just merging with Sterling," she said in a brief interview. "We're setting the standard for future tech partnerships. This is how legacies are made." Legacy, that word again. My father had used it like a shield for decades. Sienna wielded it like a crown. Back in the suite, Marcus handed me a final copy of the press release. "Timing is everything," he said, tapping his watch. "They'll be seated in 20. "Good," I muttered, eyes locked on the broadcast. "Let them talk a little more. Let her bask in it." He raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. What they didn't understand was that this wasn't just about business. This was about erasure. For years, I'd watched my family edit me out of our narrative. Holiday newsletters didn't mention me. Investor meetings introduced Sienna as the sole next-generation leader. My mother even told a distant relative I'd taken time off to figure things out. They turned me into a ghost. Meanwhile, Sienna had grown drunk on applause. She didn't just accept the spotlight, she devoured it. The more she got, the less she noticed what was happening behind the curtains. Her ego had inflated to the point where she believed she was untouchable. Unquestionable. She'd started referring to the merger as her deal. Never mind the analysts, the legal teams, the research. To her, this was a coronation. And the empire she thought she was building? It was made of glass. Inside the Anderson boardroom, I imagined her strutting to her seat, arranging her tablet just so, already scripting sound bites in her head. This move positions Anderson Tech as the undisputed leader in innovation. We've always believed in bold decisions. I could hear it all, word for word, like echoes from a past I no longer lived in. The worst part wasn't her arrogance. It was that she truly believed I wasn't worth thinking about. That's what burned. Not the ridicule, not the eye rolls at family dinners, but the absolute certainty in her eyes that I would never matter. Even last night, when I passed her at the gala entrance, she didn't even blink, just swept past like I was one of the staff. maybe a caterer, maybe no one. They always assumed silence meant defeat. In reality, it meant preparation. At 9:47 a.m., and I rose from my seat. The city buzzed below me, a symphony of horns and crosswalk beeps. The view from the top always looked better when no one knew how high you'd climbed. Sarah, my assistant, stood by the door. "The cars are ready," she said. "Cameras go live in 10. "Let them roll," I replied. "They'll want every second of this." We crossed the street through the underground garage to avoid early detection. No need for spectacle, yet. Marcus carried the briefcase. Sarah held the updated contracts. I walked empty-handed, but not unarmed. The weapon was already deployed. Sienna, at that very moment, was probably laughing, shaking hands, maybe taking a selfie with some junior exec. She loved that part, the optics, always in control, always the Carter everyone admired. But she never looked under the surface. She never saw the details, the subtle cracks, the overlooked data points, the red flags buried in footnotes. That's where the truth always lived. In the small print. And I had spent years reading everything they ignored. When we arrived in the lobby, security barely looked up. I wasn't on their radar. Of course I wasn't. I hadn't been invited. That was the beauty of being forgotten. You learn to move like air, unseen, untouchable. Until it's too late. We rode the elevator in silence, the hum of the floor indicators counting down like a clock to impact. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, like the final beat before the curtain drops. The doors opened to the executive floor at 9:59 a.m., and I stepped out into their world. Cameras pivoted, reporters turned. For the first time in years, the room noticed me, but not as Ava Carter, the discarded daughter. They saw Catherine Collins, the name on the takeover contract, the CEO of Nexus, the woman who just bought their future out from under them. And Sienna? Her mouth opened just slightly, the perfect gloss on her lips catching the overhead light. "What the hell are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because in 5 minutes, the entire room would understand that the person they laughed off, dismissed, and discarded was the only one who had been paying attention. And the woman they thought was unstoppable? She was about to learn what it felt like to fall. The moment I stepped into the conference room, time didn't just slow, it shifted. You could feel the atmosphere tilt, like the air had thickened, and no one quite understood why except me. I crossed the carpeted floor without hesitation. My heels struck the silence like warning shots. Conversations died mid-sentence. The projection screen still showed a slide that read, "Sterling Acquisition Signing, 10 a.m., in a serif font too smug for its own good. Sienna blinked first. She stood at the head of the table, fingers frozen on her touchscreen, her carefully scripted speech still on the podium. The board members turned toward me, confusion blooming across their faces like a synchronized malfunction. I didn't speak yet. I wanted them to feel it, that creeping recognition, that subconscious awareness that something vital had just gone off script. My team took their places behind me like clockwork. Sarah began placing thick folders in front of each executive. Marcus opened the briefcase and tapped on the embedded tablet, triggering a mirrored screen on the wall behind Sienna. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. It was my voice that broke the silence. "Let's not waste anyone's time. You're not here for a merger. You're here for a takeover." The room didn't gasp, too stunned for that, but shoulders tensed, jaws clenched, and hands hovered uncertainly over tabletops. Sienna found her footing first. "This is ridiculous. You're not on the agenda." I smiled. Not the polite, conciliatory kind. The kind that tells you the rope around your neck has just been yanked. "No, I'm not. Because this deal no longer belongs to Anderson Tech." I motioned to Marcus, who tapped the screen. The Sterling Industries logo flickered, then dissolved into the bold, sharp insignia of Nexus Technologies. Beneath it, a line of legal text scrolled across the display. Acquisition agreement, fully executed. Dated 3:04 a.m. The documents had been signed hours before anyone in this room had even brewed their first coffee. Someone to my left dropped a pen. Across from me, an older man, Anderson's head of legal, flipped through the folder in front of him with trembling fingers. Sienna reached for her own copy. Her pupils dilated when she saw the signatures. Her voice cracked on the second word. This isn't possible. You never looked close enough, I said quietly. No one did. Behind me, Sarah tapped into the secure portal. Screens populated with audit trails, penetration test reports, encrypted communications, every damning detail about Sterling's internal decay. Their systems weren't just outdated, they were dangerous. Had Anderson gone through with the purchase, the vulnerabilities would have bled them dry within months. Your due diligence missed it, I continued. Our team found 6 major breaches, 3 of which hadn't even been patched. And your forecasted valuation? I shook my head. Inflated by nearly 60%. Sienna's hand gripped the edge of the table. Her knuckles went white. You're bluffing. This is a PR stunt. Is it? I said, stepping closer to the screen. Because Sterling's board thought otherwise. They agreed to our proposal when we gave them the full report, in exchange for discretion and survival. Her lips parted, but she couldn't refute it. She couldn't spin it. There were no press lines to fall back on, no teleprompters to guide her out. I turned toward the board. What I'm offering is more than damage control. Nexus Technologies is prepared to not only absorb Sterling, but also extend an acquisition proposal to Anderson Tech. There it was. The floor dropped out from under them. An executive near the end of the table coughed. Another removed his glasses. Their eyes darted between the documents, the screen, and me. They weren't angry. They were calculating. They understood what this meant. The empire had cracked, and I was standing in the breach. I don't understand. My father's voice finally broke through. It wasn't firm or booming. It was brittle. Why go through all this? I turned toward him slowly, each breath colder than the last. I tried to warn you, I said. I tried to fix the rot before it spread. But you told me I didn't belong, that I didn't understand real business. He looked smaller than I remembered. The man who once owned every room he walked into now couldn't even look me in the eye. My gaze shifted back to Sienna. Her hands were shaking, her poise unraveling strand by strand. The smug composure she wore like a second skin now hung in tatters. This was supposed to be my legacy, she whispered. It still is, I said, voice like glass. Just not the one you wanted. I stepped away from the table. You have 12 hours to respond to the acquisition offer. After that, we go public. All of it. Sterling's vulnerabilities, your oversight, the financial miscalculations. Every investor will know exactly what they were being sold. Sarah handed Sienna a flash drive. That contains the full Nexus proposal. With it, you might still salvage something. I paused at the doorway. Or you can keep pretending, keep performing, and let this company drown in your pride. And then I left, leaving behind the ashes of their illusion and the first flicker of something they'd never given me: control. That evening, I watched the sun dip behind the Pacific from the rooftop of Nexus Tower, floor 72. The city buzzed far below, clueless to the seismic shift that had just taken place. A dozen headlines were already making the rounds. Some called it the tech coup of the decade. Others simply labeled it what it was: a hostile takeover executed with surgical precision. None of them knew the real story. Not about the years I spent rebuilding my sense of worth brick by digital brick. Not about the nights alone in silence, where every doubt whispered like static in my mind. Not about the moment I realized the people who were supposed to believe in me never really had. They didn't deserve a front row seat to my success. They'd spent too long facing the wrong direction. Inside my office, Marcus poured 2 glasses of champagne, not to celebrate, just to mark the moment. "It's done," he said quietly, handing me a glass. I turned it in my hand, watching the bubbles rise. "They'll fight back," I said, "but it's already too late." He nodded. "They underestimated you for too long. That was their first mistake. And their last." I thought about Sienna, how her voice had cracked when she realized the press was already circulating the revised narrative. How she'd stormed out of the boardroom an hour after we left, trailing a silence no PR agency could spin. Her empire wasn't crumbling. It had already collapsed. All that remained was the sound of glass settling. I thought about my father, about the look on his face when he finally understood that I hadn't just survived. I'd outgrown him, that the daughter he'd dismissed as unremarkable had built something he could never touch, not even with all his connections, money, or name. The Carter legacy didn't die that day. It evolved. In the days that followed, the board voted unanimously to approve the Nexus acquisition of Anderson Tech. Their options were limited. Resistance meant exposure. Compliance meant survival. They chose to breathe on my terms. We implemented sweeping reforms within the first month. New infrastructure, full data encryption, security culture training. We severed contracts with vendors that had been bleeding them dry for years. The old guard resisted, but the numbers didn't lie. For the first time in a decade, Anderson's stock climbed steadily without artificial propping. My mother sent a message, short, clipped. "Congratulations!" Nothing more, as if those 13 letters could bridge a lifetime of detachment. I never replied. Sienna eventually resurfaced, quietly taking a mid-level role at a consulting firm in Boston. She didn't return calls, didn't show her face online. From what I heard, she'd deleted every interview, every article, every trace of the empire she once believed was invincible. Her silence didn't taste like victory. It tasted like vindication. But none of that was why I did it. Not really. This wasn't about winning some warped family competition. It wasn't even about revenge, not in the purest sense. What drove me wasn't anger. It was clarity. I wanted to prove, not to them, but to me, that I was never the problem. That being quiet didn't mean being weak. That walking away wasn't failure. It was foresight. That when someone strips you of a title, a seat at the table, even your name, you don't beg. You build your own. And when you're ready, you walk back in. Not to ask for permission, but to take what should have been yours all along. I stood by the window as twilight painted the skyline in gold and bruised lavender. Below, people moved like stars, tiny, scattered, all chasing something. I used to want their validation. Now, I only wanted the truth. And I had it. Not in the articles or the earnings reports or the acquisition headlines, but in every person who worked under Nexus. Every engineer, every coder, every exhausted intern who stayed up debugging till 3 a.m. They believed in the vision because I let it speak louder than my last name. That was the real legacy. So I raise this question to you. Who decides your worth? The ones who handed you a name? The people who claim to know what you're capable of? Or do you decide, quietly, steadily, every day that you refuse to shrink yourself to fit the box they built for you? Because here's what I've learned. The best revenge isn't a headline. It's becoming everything they swore you couldn't be, without ever needing to say, "I told you so." And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? What would you do if the ones who should have believed in you became the ones standing in your way? Let's talk about it. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't the ones told from a stage, but the ones we carry quietly until we're ready to speak.